Hello, my best students, and welcome again to your channel, Native Flow. Today, we are going to explore one of the most fascinating business success stories of the modern era. Red Bull, a company that started with a single product and somehow built one of the most recognizable brands on earth. And honestly, this story is not really about an energy drink. It's about marketing, psychology, branding, risk-taking, and understanding human attention better than almost anyone else. Because here is something surprising. If you ask people why Red Bull became successful, many assume it was because of the drink itself. But the truth is much more interesting. Many competitors created similar drinks. Some were cheaper, some tasted better, some had bigger budgets. Yet Red Bull became a global phenomenon. Why? Because Red Bull never wanted to be known as a beverage company. It wanted to become part of culture, part of adventure, part of ambition, part of excitement. Instead of simply selling a can, they sold an idea. The idea that life should be bigger, faster, bolder, more exciting. And that strategy changed everything. Now think about this for a moment. When you hear the name Red Bull, what comes to mind? Formula One racing, extreme sports, mountain climbing, airplanes, athletes, world records, skydiving, the famous space jump from the edge of space. Most people don't immediately think about a drink, and that's exactly why Red Bull became extraordinary. They turned marketing into entertainment. They turned advertising into experiences. And they turned a simple product into a global lifestyle brand. In this episode, you will discover how the idea for Red Bull was born, how an Austrian entrepreneur found inspiration on the other side of the world, why almost everyone thought the business would fail, how Red Bull built one of the most powerful marketing machines ever created, how the company became much more than a beverage brand, and why business schools still study its strategy decades later. And while listening, you will improve your English naturally through business vocabulary, marketing vocabulary, entrepreneurship vocabulary, storytelling, listening practice, and deep comprehension. So relax, listen carefully, and let's begin with chapter number 1, the unexpected discovery that changed everything. Before we continue, let me tell you something important. Watching free videos can help you learn, but real transformation happens when you stop consuming and start committing. That's exactly why I created the English Master course. This isn't just another English course. It's a complete English learning system designed to help you finally stop struggling and start speaking with confidence. Inside, you'll get step-by-step video lessons, practical exercises, worksheets, PDFs, books, direct WhatsApp support, exclusive bonuses, and a community of motivated learners who are on the same journey as you. But the most valuable thing isn't the content, it's the guidance. Because most learners don't fail because they're not smart enough. They fail because they feel lost, overwhelmed, and inconsistent. That's why you're never alone inside this course. When you have questions, you can reach out. When you need help, you can ask. When you lose motivation, you'll find support. This is not school English. This is real English for real life. English for conversations. English for opportunities. English for confidence. English for the future you want to build. And the best part? You don't just get access to what's available today. You'll continue receiving future updates, new materials, bonus resources, and improvements as the course grows. One decision today can completely change the way you learn English for years to come. So if you're serious about becoming fluent, if you're tired of starting over, if you're ready to invest in yourself and finally take your English to the next level, click the link below. Join the English Master Course. Learn once, improve forever. Let's begin your journey to real English fluency. Chapter number 1, the unexpected discovery that changed everything. Every billion-dollar company begins with an idea. But honestly, the idea behind Red Bull did not begin in Europe. It began thousands of kilometers away in Asia. And at the time, nobody imagined it would eventually create one of the most successful brands in modern business history. Now let's go back to the early 1980s. An Austrian businessman named Dietrich Mateschitz was traveling through Thailand for work. At the time, he worked in marketing. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't an athlete, and he certainly wasn't planning to create a global beverage empire. In fact, the trip that changed his life happened almost by accident. Now, here's what happened. Like many business travelers, Mateschitz often suffered from jet lag, long flights, different time zones, constant exhaustion. And honestly, if you've ever traveled far from home, you know exactly how miserable that feeling can be. Your body feels tired, your brain feels slow, your energy disappears. And that's exactly what he was experiencing. Then one day, he discovered a local Thai drink called Krating Dang. The name meant something similar to Red Bull. It wasn't designed for international markets. It wasn't famous globally. It wasn't even trying to become a worldwide brand. It was simply a local energy drink. But after drinking it, something surprised him. His energy improved dramatically. And suddenly, he became curious, very curious, because marketers are trained to notice opportunities. And Mateschitz noticed something important. The product was extremely popular in Thailand. Workers drank it, drivers drank it, people used it whenever they needed energy. And yet, nothing similar existed in Western markets. That observation became the beginning of everything. Now here's where many people would have stopped. Most people see interesting products every day. Most people notice opportunities, but very few people act on them. That's the difference. Ideas are common. Execution is rare. And honestly, this is one of the biggest lessons in business. The world is full of ideas. The people who succeed are usually the ones who take action. Now, Mateschitz couldn't stop thinking about the drink. The more he analyzed it, the more he became convinced that the concept could work internationally. But there was a problem. A very big problem. The Western market was completely different. People had never seen a product like this before. The taste was unusual. The category barely existed. And convincing people to drink something new would be extremely difficult. Most experts would have considered the idea risky. Some would have called it crazy. But entrepreneurs often see possibilities where others see obstacles. Now, eventually, Mateschitz contacted the creator of Krating Dang, a Thai businessman named Chaleo Uvidya. The two men came from completely different backgrounds, different cultures, different countries, different experiences, but they shared one thing. They both believed the idea had potential, and together, they decided to build something new, something much bigger than the original product. Now, here's another fascinating detail. They didn't simply copy the Thai drink. Instead, they adapted it for Western consumers. They changed the formula, adjusted the taste, redesigned the packaging, created a completely new brand identity because they understood something important. Success is not always about copying. Sometimes it's about adapting, understanding a market, understanding people, understanding psychology. And honestly, Red Bull's future success would depend heavily on that understanding. Now let's talk about the can itself. Today, the Red Bull can looks completely normal, but when it first appeared, it looked strange. Most soft drinks came in larger cans. Red Bull chose a smaller, thinner design. It stood out immediately. Different, unique, memorable, and psychologically. That matters, because humans notice what is different. Now here's something very interesting. When Red Bull prepared to launch in Europe, many people believed it would fail. Banks were skeptical, retailers were skeptical, consumers were unfamiliar with the product. Even industry experts questioned whether there was a market for energy drinks at all. And honestly, their doubts were understandable. Nobody had proven the concept yet. There was no successful example to follow, no roadmap, no guarantee, just an idea, a vision, and a huge amount of uncertainty. But sometimes, the biggest opportunities appear exactly where certainty does not exist. Now, before we finish this chapter, I want you to remember something important. The story of Red Bull did not begin with a factory, or a marketing campaign, or a billion-dollar company. It began with curiosity. One person noticing something different. One person asking, what if this could work somewhere else? And honestly, many great businesses start exactly that way. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. And in the next chapter, we'll discover how Red Bull entered Europe, why many people rejected the product at first, and how an unknown energy drink slowly started attracting attention. Chapter number 2, how Red Bull entered Europe and created a market that didn't exist. Launching a new product is difficult. Launching a product that people don't understand is even harder. And honestly, that was exactly the challenge Red Bull faced. When Red Bull arrived in Austria in 1987, most consumers had never heard the phrase energy drink. Today, the category exists everywhere. You see energy drinks in supermarkets, airports, gyms, convenience stores, and gas stations. But back then, the category barely existed. People understood soft drinks, juice, coffee, water. But an energy drink? That sounded strange, and honestly, many people didn't know what to think. Now here's something fascinating. Most companies enter existing markets. They compete against products people already understand. Red Bull had a different problem. It had to create the market itself. That is much harder. Because before convincing people to buy your product, you must first convince them that the category itself should exist. And that's exactly what Red Bull had to do. Now let's imagine the situation. A customer walks into a store. They see a small silver and blue can. It costs more than many other drinks. The taste feels unusual. The product is unfamiliar, and nobody knows exactly what it is. From a traditional business perspective, this looked like a disaster. But Red Bull's founders understood something important. People don't always buy products because of logic. Sometimes they buy because of emotion, identity, curiosity, belonging, and aspiration. Now here's where Red Bull became brilliant. Instead of focusing on the drink itself, they focused on the feeling, energy, performance, adventure, achievement, excitement, freedom. They weren't selling ingredients. They were selling an experience, And honestly, that strategy changed everything. Now, many companies spend huge amounts of money on traditional advertising, television commercials, billboards, newspapers, radio. Red Bull did something different, something much smarter. They focused on creating conversations. At the beginning, they often gave away free samples. Lots of them. Students received them. Athletes received them. Club goers received them. Young professionals received them. The goal wasn't immediate profit. The goal was awareness. Because if people tried the product, some of them would talk about it, and those conversations would spread naturally. Now, here's something very interesting psychologically. Humans trust recommendations from other people more than advertisements. If a company tells you, this product is amazing, you may be skeptical. But if a friend says, you should try this, the message feels more credible. Red Bull understood this principle extremely well. Now, little by little, people started noticing the brand. Not because of giant advertising campaigns, but because the product kept appearing in places associated with energy and performance, universities, sports events, nightlife, competitions. Young, ambitious people seemed to be drinking it, and that association became powerful because brands are often built through associations. Now let's talk about the famous slogan, Red Bull gives you wings. Simple, short, memorable, and honestly, one of the greatest marketing slogans ever created. Notice something important. The slogan doesn't talk about ingredients. It doesn't talk about chemistry. It doesn't talk about nutrition. It talks about a feeling, the feeling of having more energy, more possibility, more capability. That's branding. And Red Bull became one of the best branding companies in the world. Now, here's another challenge they faced. Some governments were skeptical about energy drinks. Some regulators questioned the product. Some countries delayed approvals, and critics sometimes argued that the concept would never become mainstream. But despite the criticism, sales continued growing, slowly at first, then faster, then much faster. Because people weren't just buying a drink anymore. They were joining a brand identity. And honestly, that's when Red Bull stopped behaving like a beverage company. It started behaving like a lifestyle brand. That distinction is important because beverage companies usually compete through taste and price. Lifestyle brands compete through meaning and identity. And meaning is often much harder for competitors to copy. Now, by the early 1990s, Red Bull had achieved something remarkable. People were talking about energy drinks. The category was growing. The brand was becoming recognizable. And the company was preparing for something much bigger. Because soon, Red Bull would completely transform marketing itself, not by creating better advertisements, but by becoming part of sports, adventure, and entertainment culture around the world. And honestly, this is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Chapter number 3, How Red Bull Changed Marketing Forever. Most companies advertise products. Red Bull advertises experiences. And honestly, that single difference explains a huge part of the company's success. Because at some point, the founders realized something important. If Red Bull kept competing like a normal beverage company, it would always be compared to other drinks, other flavors, other prices, other ingredients, and that's a difficult game to win forever. So instead, they changed the game completely. Rather than asking, how do we sell more drinks? They asked, how do we build one of the most exciting brands in the world? And honestly, that question changed everything. Now let's talk about traditional advertising for a moment. Most companies create commercials showing their product, people drinking it, people smiling, people talking about how good it is. Very predictable, very common, very forgettable. But Red Bull understood something fascinating about human psychology. People remember stories far more than products. People remember emotions far more than ingredients. People remember experiences far more than advertisements. So instead of spending all their energy talking about the drink, they started creating moments people would never forget. And honestly, this was genius. Now think about extreme sports: mountain biking, snowboarding, surfing, motocross, skydiving. At the time, many of these sports received very little attention from major brands. They were exciting, dangerous, adventurous, but they weren't receiving huge sponsorships. Red Bull saw an opportunity. Instead of following popular sports, they entered niche sports filled with passion and energy. And little by little, the Red Bull logo started appearing everywhere: on helmets, on racing cars, on airplanes, on athletes, on competitions, on events. And something powerful happened psychologically. People stopped associating Red Bull with a beverage. They started associating it with excitement, adventure, courage, performance, freedom. Now here's something brilliant. Many people watching these events weren't even thinking about energy drinks, but they were constantly seeing the Red Bull brand connected to extraordinary experiences. This created emotional branding. And emotional branding is incredibly powerful because humans often make decisions emotionally first and logically second. Now let's talk about Formula One. Most companies sponsor sports teams. Red Bull bought entire teams. Eventually, Red Bull Racing became one of the most successful teams in Formula One history. Millions of people around the world watched races featuring the Red Bull brand, week after week, year after year. And honestly, the exposure was enormous. But more importantly, the association was perfect. Speed, competition, excellence, performance. Everything matched the image Red Bull wanted to create. Now here's another fascinating thing. Red Bull gradually stopped acting like a beverage company altogether. Instead, it started acting like a media company. This was revolutionary. Most beverage companies create advertisements. Red Bull created content, videos, films, documentaries, sports coverage, entertainment, entire media productions. And honestly, they became exceptionally good at it. Now let's talk about one of the most famous marketing events in modern history, the Red Bull Stratos Project. In 2012, an Austrian skydiver named Felix Baumgartner jumped from the edge of space. Yes, from space. Millions of people watched live. News organizations around the world covered the event. The internet exploded with attention, and throughout the entire project, the Red Bull brand was everywhere. Now think about this carefully. People weren't watching a commercial, they were watching history. And yet, the brand became part of the story. That's marketing at an entirely different level. And honestly, very few companies have ever achieved something similar. Now, here's the deeper lesson. Red Bull understood that attention is one of the most valuable resources in the world. And instead of interrupting people with advertisements, they gave people something worth watching, something worth sharing, something worth remembering. That's why their marketing felt different. Now, competitors tried copying Red Bull. Many attempted similar strategies. Some spent huge amounts of money, but few achieved the same success. Why? Because Red Bull wasn't simply sponsoring events. It was building an entire identity consistently. Every event, every athlete, every campaign, every video, everything supported the same message: energy, adventure, possibility. And over time, that consistency became one of the strongest brands on earth. Now, before we finish this chapter, I want you to remember something important. Red Bull didn't become famous because it sold a drink. It became famous because it sold a feeling, a vision, an identity. And honestly, that may be one of the greatest marketing lessons ever created. Chapter number 4: How Red Bull Became More Than a Drink. By the 2000s, Red Bull had already become one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Millions of people were buying the product. The company was expanding globally. The marketing strategy was working. But honestly, something even more interesting was happening behind the scenes. Red Bull was slowly transforming into something much bigger than a beverage company. And this is where the story becomes truly unique. Because most successful companies focus on selling products, Red Bull focused on building an ecosystem. Now think about Coca-Cola. Most people see Coca-Cola as a beverage company. Think about Pepsi, also a beverage company. But when people think about Red Bull, they often think about Formula One, extreme sports, adventure, athletes, media content, world records, entertainment. And honestly, that's very unusual because Red Bull managed to make the product almost secondary. The brand became bigger than the drink itself. Now, here's something fascinating. Most companies spend enormous amounts of money buying media attention. Red Bull decided to create media attention. Huge difference. Instead of paying television stations constantly, they started producing their own content: videos, films, interviews, sports coverage, documentaries, online media, and gradually, Red Bull Media House was born. Now, this was a brilliant strategic move because suddenly, the company no longer depended entirely on traditional advertising. It could create its own stories, its own audiences, its own content, its own attention. And honestly, this was years ahead of its time. Today, many modern businesses are trying to become media companies, but Red Bull started doing this long before it became popular. Now let's talk about ownership. Most companies sponsor athletes. Red Bull actually invested deeply into entire sports ecosystems. They bought teams. They developed athletes. They created competitions. They built long-term relationships. And this gave them something extremely valuable: control over attention. Because instead of borrowing audiences temporarily, they were creating audiences permanently. Now let's look at Formula One again. Red Bull Racing became one of the most successful teams in motorsport history. World championships, global exposure, millions of viewers. And every victory strengthened the brand image. People saw performance, precision, speed, winning, and those qualities naturally transferred into the Red Bull brand itself. Psychologically, this is called association. The brain links things together. When people repeatedly see Red Bull connected to excellence, they start associating excellence with Red Bull, even if they aren't consciously thinking about it. Now here's another brilliant decision. Red Bull focused heavily on younger audiences, students, young professionals, athletes, creators, ambitious people, people who wanted excitement and achievement. And honestly, This was incredibly smart because younger consumers often become long-term customers. If someone develops positive feelings toward a brand at 20 years old, those feelings can remain for decades. Now let's talk about social media. When platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook started growing rapidly, Red Bull was ready. Why? Because it already knew how to create content people wanted to watch. Most companies were still making advertisements. Red Bull was making entertainment. That difference became a massive advantage. Now suddenly, their videos could spread globally. People shared them, commented on them, talked about them, and all of that attention strengthened the brand even further. Now here's something extremely important. Many companies try to sell products directly. Red Bull often focused on creating emotional connection first. And honestly, emotional connection creates stronger brands than simple transactions. People rarely become passionate about ingredients, but they become passionate about identities, communities, experiences, stories. And Red Bull understood this deeply. Now let's talk about business lessons, because there is one lesson here that applies to almost every industry. The strongest brands are often not selling products. They're selling meaning. Apple sells creativity and simplicity. Nike sells achievement and determination. And Red Bull sells energy, adventure, and possibility. That's why these brands become powerful. They connect emotionally, not just commercially. Now, before we finish this chapter, I want you to remember something important. Red Bull did not become a global success because it had the best advertising. It became a global success because it stopped thinking like a beverage company. It started thinking like a media company, a lifestyle company, a storytelling company. And honestly, that strategic shift changed everything. In the final chapter, we'll explore the biggest business lessons from Red Bull's success and why entrepreneurs around the world continue studying this company today. Chapter number 5, the business lessons behind Red Bull's success. Now we've reached the most important part of the story, because Red Bull is not just a company. It is a collection of business lessons. And honestly, that's one reason entrepreneurs, marketers, and business students continue studying it decades later. The company didn't simply sell billions of cans. It changed the way people think about branding itself. Now let's explore the biggest lessons. Lesson number 1, don't compete directly. If you can create your own category. When Red Bull launched, it wasn't competing directly against Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Instead, it introduced something new, the energy drink category. This was incredibly powerful because instead of fighting for space inside an existing market, it helped create a new market. And honestly, this is one of the smartest business strategies possible. If you enter a crowded market, everyone is fighting for attention. But if you create something different, people compare you less. Now think about companies like Netflix, Airbnb, Uber. Many of them succeeded because they changed the category itself, not because they copied competitors. And Red Bull did exactly the same thing. Lesson number 2, people buy emotions more than products. This may be the most important marketing lesson in the entire story. Red Bull wasn't selling caffeine. It wasn't selling ingredients. It wasn't selling liquid inside a can. It was selling energy, adventure, performance, ambition, possibility. And honestly, this is how many great brands grow. Nike doesn't sell shoes. It sells achievement. Apple doesn't sell phones. It sells creativity and simplicity. Red Bull doesn't sell drinks. It sells excitement. that emotional connection becomes incredibly powerful because emotions create loyalty. Lesson number 3. Attention is more valuable than advertising. Most companies interrupt people with advertisements. Red Bull attracted people with experiences. This is a huge difference. Instead of saying, "Look at our product," they said, "Look at this amazing event. Look at this incredible athlete. Look at this world record." And naturally, people paid attention. Today, this lesson is more important than ever because social media rewards attention, content, stories, entertainment, education. People don't want more advertisements. They want value. And Red Bull understood this years before many competitors. Lesson number 4. Consistency builds powerful brands. Here's something fascinating. For decades, Red Bull stayed remarkably consistent. Every event, every athlete, every sponsorship, every campaign supported the same message: energy, adventure, performance, freedom. The company rarely confused people. It knew exactly what it wanted to represent. And honestly, many businesses fail because they constantly change direction. One month they're talking about one thing, the next month something completely different. Strong brands stay recognizable, and Red Bull mastered that. Lesson number 5, think bigger than your product. This might be the most important lesson of all. Red Bull's leaders eventually realized something extraordinary. The future of the company wasn't limited to beverages. It could become a media company, a sports company, an entertainment company, a lifestyle company, a content company. And honestly, that way of thinking transformed everything. Because once you stop defining yourself by your product, new opportunities appear everywhere. Now let's talk about Dietrich Mateschitz for a moment. What made him special wasn't simply business intelligence. Many intelligent people exist. What made him different was vision. He saw potential where others saw uncertainty. He saw opportunity where others saw risk. And most importantly, he acted. Because ideas alone change nothing. Execution changes everything. Now here's something interesting psychologically. Most people wait for certainty before taking action. Entrepreneurs often act despite uncertainty. That doesn't mean acting recklessly. It means understanding that opportunities rarely arrive with guarantees. Red Bull had no guarantee, no proof, no roadmap, no certainty, just a bold idea and a willingness to try. Now, before we finish this episode, I want you to remember something important. The story of Red Bull is not really about a drink. It's about vision, branding, creativity, psychology, and the power of thinking differently. A small idea discovered in Thailand eventually became a global company worth billions. Not because it had the biggest budget, not because it had the best product, but because it understood people. And honestly, understanding people is one of the most valuable business skills in the world. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Native Flow for more English learning podcasts about famous companies, business success stories, psychology, technology, communication, and personal growth. Keep learning, keep building, and keep thinking bigger.